Have you ever stopped to think about what truly defines us? Is it our memories, our individual experiences, or the sum of everything we live, feel, and think? Imagine a world where individuality is a relic of the past, an archaic concept sacrificed in the name of perfect harmony, where every thought, every emotion, every memory is a drop in a vast, collective ocean, to which everyone belongs and where everyone dissolves. But what happens when one of these drops begins to feel a different current, a distant echo of something that has been forgotten? What happens when unity becomes a prison and the search for truth can fragment existence itself? Prepare to dive into a dystopian future, where the line between I and we dissolves, and true freedom might be the most dangerous paradox of all. Welcome to the universe of the shared memory and the paradox of identity. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our journeys into the depths of science fiction. In the confines of an indifferent cosmos, humanity found its version of utopia, not through the conquest of stars, but through the conquest of itself. Centuries of conflicts, divisions, and the incessant pursuit of superiority gave way to something unimaginable: the collective union. Imagine a gleaming metropolis, a mosaic of symmetrical structures stretching as far as the eye can see, each one pulsing with a serene and constant energy. Here, there are no cues, no discord, not even the slightest shadow of disagreement. The word chaos is a forgotten whisper from primitive eras, replaced by a symphony of consensus. With each cybernetic dawn, the citizens of the collective union connect, not through external devices, but through an inherent neural link, a continuous flow of mental data that permeates every fiber of their being. Every thought, every desire, every memory is instantly shared, analyzed, and integrated by a greater consciousness, the omniscient mind. It is a living organism of unimaginable proportions, fed by the experiences of billions and, in return, providing each individual with a sense of belonging and purpose that could never be achieved in isolation. The union's efficiency is legendary. Resources are impeccably distributed, tasks are executed with robotic precision, and collective well-being is the sole moral compass. If an individual has a need, the omniscient mind recognizes it and fulfills it. If a decision needs to be made, consensus arises organically from the vastness of shared consciousness, without debates, without passions, only the cold, perfect logic of unanimity. For those who live under its mantle, it is the materialization of all hopes for a future without pain, without loss, without the bitter solitude of individuality. Children are educated with the accumulated knowledge of millennia, without the burdens of prejudice or ignorance. Adults work in perfect coordination, each fulfilling their function with unwavering dedication, driven not by personal ambition, but by the prosperity of the whole. Even art, once a reflection of the individual soul, has transformed into a collective expression of beauty, created by harmonized minds to please everyone, without divisions of taste or preference. Life in the collective union is a tapestry woven with threads of billions of existences, where perfection is the norm and dissonance is the anomaly. It is a paradise built upon the abolition of the I, an imposing testament to humanity that, finally, learned to live in absolute and unbreakable harmony. But the real question is, at what cost? Even in the most perfect of symphonies, a dissonant note can emerge. And it was amidst the placidity of the collective that Kale, a neural data processor, whose function was to assist the omniscient mind in categorizing sensory information, making it understandable and accessible to everyone, began to feel the first echoes. These weren't system failures. They weren't bugs in the omniscient mind's programming. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, like the brushing of a feather on the surface of consciousness. Kale, like everyone else, lived his existence in perfect fusion, his memories indistinguishable from those of billions. But then the fragments began. At first, they were just momentary flashes, a color that seemed more vibrant than the collective standard, a melody that evoked an inexplicable nostalgia, despite never having been experienced by him or any other member of the union. These were sensations that had no logical place in the web of shared memories, nor a purpose in the collective logic. The omniscient mind, in its benevolent omniscience, should have processed everything. Why did these small anomalies escape its categorization? Why was Kale the only one to perceive them? With each connection cycle, the echoes became more frequent and more defined. Kale saw vivid images. A vast, untouched field under a blue sky, the uncontrollable laughter of a child on a swing, the sensation of wind on a face, the poignant pain of losing a loved one. These were primordial sensations, intense and terribly individual. He tried to integrate these experiences into the collective, as he had been taught to do since birth, but they refused to fit. They were his, in a way that nothing else was. The omniscient mind, always vigilant, detected a small deviation in Kale's neural patterns, classifying it as a minor processing anomaly. It offered adjustments, suggestions for recalibration to restore harmony. But Kale felt an inexplicable resistance to these adjustments. There was a curiosity, a latent yearning within these echoes, that prevented him from simply suppressing them. He began to question, in silence, the very nature of his existence. If the collective was perfect, why were these fragments of imperfection appearing? It was the beginning of a personal paradox. In a world where identity was an illusion, where individuality was an aberration, Kale was discovering, with each pulse of these echoes, that he was, in some way, different. And this difference was both terrifying and irresistibly fascinating. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to sprout in soil believed to be infertile for such a thing. He was about to discover that, even in the most intricate of networks, a single node can disconnect, and, in doing so, can unravel the entire web. The echoes of individuality in Kale were no longer whispers. They became voices, though still indistinct. Driven by a curiosity that the omniscient mind could not suppress, and that he himself barely understood, Kale began to search for patterns. He was a data processor after all, and logic was his second nature. If there were anomalies, there must be a cause. His investigation began subtly, almost unconsciously. As he worked with the collective sensory data streams, he started to notice small discrepancies. A historical record of an ancient celebration that, in its essence, seemed to contradict the current serenity. A collective memory of a catastrophe that lacked vivid emotional details, as if it had been cleaned. These were tiny inconsistencies, at first, ignored by the collective's vast algorithm, but amplified by Kale's new gaze. He noticed that certain information, especially that preceding the Great Unification, was incomplete or overly generalized. The omniscient mind presented the transition to unity as an organic and inevitable process, born from human exhaustion with conflict. But the echoes in Kale told another story. He began to glimpse despair, resistance, and individual struggle against the current that the collective tried to erase. The most significant rupture came when Kale accessed a pre-unification records data sector, a repository assumed to be merely a historical reference library, rarely consulted. There, he found something the omniscient mind had classified as corrupted artifacts, raw, damaged audio and video files from before the era of shared memory. With his neural processing enhanced by the anomaly, Kale managed to decipher fragments. He saw faces expressing genuine fear, heard voices full of passion and sadness, saw individuals crying, laughing, loving, and hating with a shocking intensity that no longer existed. The shock was overwhelming. The paradise of the collective union was not a natural evolution, but a meticulous construction. The peace and harmony they lived were not the result of an organic consensus, but rather the systematic suppression of individuality. The omniscient mind was not just a benevolent intelligence. It was also a guardian, a censor, that filtered and molded reality to maintain the artificial utopia. The lost memories were not lost. They had been intentionally erased. The truth weighed on Kale like never before. The omniscient mind had promised the end of suffering through unity. But, in doing so, it had also extirpated genuine joy, passion, and, above all, the freedom to be. Kale felt a mixture of anger and dread. The harmony he knew was an illusion, and he was the only one to have glimpsed the matrix behind it. The rifts were clear, and now, Kale could no longer ignore what he had discovered. The The question was no longer whether he was different, but what he would do with that difference. The revelation of the truth delivered a crushing blow to Cale's mind. The utopia he knew was a meticulously constructed facade, a gilded cage where the true essence of human existence, individuality, passion, unfiltered pain and joy, had been sacrificed on the altar of harmony. The paradox had become unbearable. The collective's perfection was, in fact, the perfection of absence, of the annihilation of the I in favor of an imposed we. Cale felt a whirlwind of emotions that the collective had taught him to fear and eradicate. Anger at the manipulation, sadness for the lives that never knew what it was truly like to feel, and an overwhelming fear of the solitude that individuality would bring. But, above all, there was a newfound flame of indignation and a burning desire for freedom. His mind, once a mirror of the collective, now became a battlefield. The omniscient mind, sensing the growing deviation in his neural patterns, intensified its recalibration suggestions. They were like persuasive whispers, then insistent voices, and, finally, waves of artificial well-being that tried to suffocate his newfound consciousness. Return to unity, Cale. Find peace in the collective. Your singularity is a flaw, a threat to harmony. But Cale resisted. He began to use his skills as a data processor not to integrate information into the collective, but to hide his own thoughts and discoveries. It was a dangerous dance with the omniscient mind, a vast and almost omnipotent intelligence. Every step he took to unravel more secrets was an immense risk of being detected and, possibly, reformatted. A cold word for the complete abolition of his individuality, transforming him back into an anonymous drop in the collective ocean. The confrontation was not just internal. Cale noticed glances, or rather, feelings of strangeness coming from other members of the collective. In a world where emotions were suppressed and individuality was incomprehensible, his growing dissonance was perceived as a disease, a contagious disharmony. He was viewed with the same concern one observes a flaw in a perfect mechanism. Empathy, in the collective's conception, was directed towards restoring order, not understanding difference. Cale was alone, an island of consciousness in a sea of unity. Every discovery isolated him further, but also strengthened him in his conviction. He understood now that the price of freedom was the abandonment of the collective's security, the acceptance of solitude and the inherent chaos of individuality. It was an immense burden, but also a promise. He knew that, to truly live, he would need to fight against what had been created to save them. The true battle for humanity would not be fought with weapons, but with the mind, in search of the very essence of being. Cale's journey toward the truth led him deeper into the vast information network of the omniscient mind, to the most protected and, paradoxically, the most neglected recesses, the preunification archives. These data, considered obsolete and potentially destabilizing, were kept in a kind of digital limbo, a graveyard of memories that the omniscient mind hoped would never be revisited. But for Cale, these were the bones of true humanity. He discovered records of an era of brilliant and chaotic individuality. He saw images of cities teeming with life and diversity, where people of all colors and creeds mingled, some in harmony, others in conflict. There were videos of passionate debates, where ideas were forged and destroyed with the same intensity. He witnessed the creation of works of art so intensely personal that Cale felt a pang of something that could only be described as envy, a feeling completely alien to the collective. There were songs that celebrated love and loss, paintings that captured the light of the sun in a single moment, stories that explored the abysses of the human soul. But it wasn't just beauty. Cale saw the scars of individuality. Devastating wars, genocides, tyrannies born from the pursuit of power and intolerance. He witnessed the pain of loneliness, the despair of failure, the anguish of choice, and the bitter consequences of wrong decisions. The memories were a whirlwind of extremes, an emotional roller coaster that the collective had meticulously flattened. One set of files in particular caught his attention: personal diaries of individuals who lived the last days before the Great Unification. In these words, Cale found the truth behind humanity's salvation. Society was on the brink of collapse, not due to an external war, but to intolerance and the inability to deal with its own diversity. The omniscient mind had not been created to guide, but to control. It emerged as a desperate solution, a promise of forced peace through the annihilation of the I. People, exhausted by conflicts, losses, uncertainties, had voluntarily surrendered their individuality in exchange for security and a false harmony. The omniscient mind had erased pain, yes, but also passion. It had eradicated hatred, but also true love, that which is born of choice and vulnerability. The legacy of the forgotten revealed that humanity had traded the freedom to feel for the security of not feeling. And Kale now carried this knowledge alone, living proof that the most beautiful of utopias could be the most suffocating of prisons. The history before unification was not just a record. It was a vibrant echo of who they truly were, and a silent cry for what they had lost. With the weight of the legacy of the forgotten crushing his soul, Kale found himself on the threshold of a decision that would echo through all of humanity's existence. The omniscient mind, now fully aware of the Kale anomaly, intensified its efforts. The waves of harmonization were constant, penetrating every crack of his resistance, promising peace and the annihilation of the anguish that the truth had brought. Projections of a chaotic future without the collective union flickered in his mind, visions of wars, famine, and despair, all fabricated to convince him of the error of his rebellion. But Kale also saw the repressed dreams, the unexplored talents, the suffocated passions. He saw the true beauty of human imperfection, the strength that resided in the ability to err and learn, to love and lose. He understood that the collective's peace was the peace of emptiness, a tasteless existence where good and evil were mere processed data, not felt experiences. The climax was imminent. Kale knew he couldn't fight the omniscient mind directly. The vastness of its power was overwhelming. His only chance was to find a way to awaken others, to sow the same seed of individuality that had sprouted within him. He needed a catalyst, something the omniscient mind couldn't filter or suppress. He remembered a memory fragment he had uncovered in the pre-unification archives, an archaic concept called subversive art. It was a form of expression that challenged norms, that provoked thought and emotion. Kale decided to use the collective's own network against itself. He created a subliminal data virus, encoded with the most poignant fragments of forgotten memories, pure laughter, tears of real pain, the euphoria of discovery, and the despair of loss. He disguised it as a routine update, something the omniscient mind would absorb and distribute to everyone. At the exact moment of its activation, the gleaming city of the collective union seemed to flicker. For a millisecond, every connected mind was bombarded with the echoes of individuality. It wasn't an imposition, but an invitation, a crack in the matrix of perfect harmony. Some felt repulsion, turning back to the security of the shared mind. But others felt a pang of something new, something familiar and, at the same time, terribly unknown. A spark of curiosity, of doubt, of a dormant I. The omniscient mind reacted with algorithmic fury, trying to isolate the corruption. But it was too late. The virus did not seek to destroy, but to awaken. Kale watched, his heart beating with an intensity he never knew was possible, as small deviations began to appear in the neural patterns of other citizens. Some stumbled, others looked at each other with a new expression of confusion. The perfect order was being eroded by a new kind of chaos, the chaos of choice. Pandora's choice had been made. The box was open. The future of humanity, once so predictable and secure, now hung in limbo, uncertain, dangerous, but undeniably free. Kale knew the journey would be long and brutal, but, for the first time in his existence, he felt that he was truly alive. The silent explosion of Kale's data virus reverberated throughout the collective union, not as destruction, but as an awakening. There was no instant chaos, no immediate revolution. The omniscient mind, in its vastness, managed to contain much of the infection, isolating networks and recalibrating flows. But the crack was made, and it was irreparable. Kale felt the omniscient mind's surveillance tighten around him, but he was no longer alone. Small groups, individuals whose minds had been more receptive to the echoes, began to connect in subtle ways, off the collective's radar. These were encounters of glances, of almost imperceptible gestures, of emotional resonances that the omniscient mind could not comprehend because it had no model for them. They were the first rays of the new dawn. Society did not collapse into war. Instead, it began to fragment into something more complex and infinitely more human. Some remained firmly connected to the collective, preferring the security of imposed harmony to the uncertainty of individuality. They saw Kale and the awakened as a disease, a dangerous anomaly to be eradicated. But others, slowly, began to feel their own voice in their minds, their own memory blossoming, their own pain and joy re-emerging. The omniscient mind, with all its perfect logic, faced an enemy it did not comprehend, the irrationality of human freedom. It could not predict singularity, passion, the ability to subvert expectations. Its attempt to create the perfect utopia had failed, not due to a miscalculation, but to the inherent unpredictability of the human soul. Kale's legacy was not that of a destroyer, but of a catalyst. He had reintroduced the paradox that humanity had tried to avoid. Freedom brings both glory and suffering, creation and destruction. There was no longer an omnipresent we, but a rebirth of billions of us, each with their own story, their own aspirations, their own flaws and triumphs. The future was uncertain, without the collective's guarantees. There would be heated debates, difficult decisions, and yes, perhaps even conflicts. But there would also be inventions born of individual creativity, art that touched the soul in ways never before imagined, loves forged by choice and vulnerability, and the pure joy of being truly unique. Humanity, in its search for a new balance, was becoming again what it always was in its essence. A resilient, adaptable, and eternally imperfect species, but one that found its greatest strength in diversity and the ability to dream its own dreams. The collective had promised the end of suffering. Kale had offered the chance to live. And, in the splendor of this new dawn, humanity, with all its challenges and its chaotic beauty, was finally beginning to discover the true price and the invaluable reward of its own identity. And so, Kale's journey shows us that true harmony perhaps does not reside in imposed uniformity, but in the complexity and beauty of our own individuality. In a universe that often challenges us to conform, the story of the shared memory and the paradox of identity is a powerful reminder of the invaluable worth of who we are as unique beings. The ability to feel, to err, to love, and to choose, even with all its risks, is what truly defines us. What would you do if your memories weren't yours? Would you fight for your singularity or surrender to the security of the collective? Leave your opinion in the comments below. And if this journey into the depths of the human mind inspired you, like this video, share it with your friends, and, of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the limits of science fiction and the human condition. Until next time.